The chapter starts with Alita's flashback, when the 6 emperors decided to kill off all the blood relations of the tyrant king, but a bodyguard, Karen, was trusted by the king's wife to keep their daughter alive and safe. He took that as his responsibility and took the daughter to Defilon Mountain and caring and loving her like a father. Being a free hirer, he was the one who taught her how to fight like a sword hire. He raised her the best way possible while keeping her identity secret and his job intact. Now they both live in the hiding, only going out for commission money. Sihan suddenly gets cautious of whether she considers him an enemy, as he has been the person who killed her father, but she responds in an unbothered way of not having any connection with his troubled father anymore. She further explained the reason for attacking him being the fact that the emperors are scared of the king's family opening portals and summoning otherworldly creatures, so to tackle that, they decided to find all the king's blood relatives and execute them. So when Sihan asked her about her relation to King Lusklin, she mistook him for one of the executors. This behavior of his former friends frustrates him to no end, but being an Earth's typical creature, he goes on to casually and confidently console Alita and tell her how he, a suddenly dropped guy in her life, is a good person as compared to those people. Alita, obviously unimpressed, cuts him off asking if he is the savior Sung Sihan, because to her knowledge he went back to Earth. So how come he fell from the sky and that too naked? The naked part triggers Sihan and he embarrassedly starts ranting about how he isn't a weird guy who was naked by choice. But the portals only let living organisms pass and it kills him to fall naked the 3rd time. He goes on to whine about falling back to Earth naked in the midst of a big crowd. Confused yet ignoring his rant, she further inquires why would anybody in Terranor open a portal to summon him back, and who could have that power? To this Sihan arrogantly tells that he opened the portal and summoned himself back and it took him a good 10 years to do so, but he cuts himself off becoming hyper-aware suddenly. Alita questions baffled. Sihan explains how to open the portals. He used directions towards the bloodline of Lusklin, which indirectly makes her his summoner since she's the purest of Lusklin blood, but the worst part is that to the others, it'll surely seem that she summoned him for her revenge. Alita is shocked and confused over this. All this speech leads to the fact that the guards under Higher Zeon and Mag-Ion clan have already arrived at the location where traces of summoning magic are found and are ready to attack her cabin. Zeon thanks Clan for his aid in finding traces of summoning magic while Alita gets herself together to fight those people. Sihan, looking like dumb trouble, stands there thinking how Alita looks so ready to face such a situation, and how she might hate him for blowing her cover that she kept intact for years. His dramatic self even imagines her lashing out at him for this. So Sihan, nervously, asks Alita to say something if she wants to, and to his surprise, she ends up thanking him for warning her timely of this sudden attack. Zeon warns Alita, the sinner in his perspective, to surrender herself or she'll be blown up along with her cabin. He asks Clan to scare her with a small attack, to which Clan calmly fires up the cabin with a burning spear. A panicked Zeon starts screaming how this was way out of line, to which calm Clan explains how this is only a show fire, and it won't hurt her other than a slight chance of a few burns. A sudden burst cuts them off as Alita is out of the cabin without a single scratch to her. This shocks everyone out there, but they try and fight her in the greed of the 10 gold coin reward Zeon announced for capturing her alive. What shocks everyone, even more, is the fact that she's a sword hire, strong enough to take down many of those soldiers. Alita fights the soldiers while thinking of a way to get out when a strike blows her off to the ground. An angry Zeon, surrounded by blue light, announces that he will now deal with the cursed lowly blood himself. Alita notices the fighting energy on his armor, the reason that took her down. She worries about him being a level higher than her. She still takes a chance to try and fight him but ends up with a broken arm. Knowing she had no choice but to surrender, she puts down her weapons. Zeon, confused, proceeds to tell her she made the right choice when someone cuts him off by suddenly speaking from very near his ear. Sihan appears out of nowhere babbling about how Zeon was feeling bad for Alita, so he lost all his anger, and is now getting calm with her. Meanwhile, Zeon stands there extremely baffled over the identity of this unknown personality and the fact that he didn't feel even the slightest of his movements around him. Zeon tries to interrogate who Sihan is and how are his movements so smooth when Sihan calmly says he has got to take some responsibility, even though he got nothing against him. The next moment Zeon is seen flying away with force enough to bury him half in the ground just by a casual punch of Sihan, leaving every person too stunned for a moment. Alita sits on the ground confused why Sihan is hurting the soldiers that work under the kings that were his allies. Clan angrily exclaims he must be of the evil bloodline too and orders the soldiers to take him down, but Sihan, calmly and arrogantly, keeps sending them flying off and a half into the ground along with a slick and no hard feelings, and an explanation that he is not of the evil bloodline. Too scared to die that way, the rest of the soldiers start apologizing to Sihan while Xion gains consciousness and is about to get up to fight back only to be shocked, seeing his soldiers lying around him, buried in the ground the same way as him. Xion looks at them ashamed and confused about how an unarmed human was able to do that so casually, and how he is lucky he is still alive when his mind suddenly clicks about seeing such strength and movements before too. He recalls seeing Savior Sihan do it in the past. But before he could be clear, Sihan approaches the now awake Xion, who is too shocked and scared to react, asking him to rest a little longer and punches his half into the ground like an ostrich once again. Along with burying living people to the ground with bare movement, Sihan keeps repeating how he has nothing against them so they don't need to fight, but if they try, they'll be taken down. Magayon clan disappointedly thinks about the soldiers being useless and wonders who this sword hire monster is and where he appears. Sihan turns to a disoriented Alita and inquires if she's not gonna get up since he doesn't think they're gonna attack them anymore. Still blank and bewildered regarding the whole scenario, she complies and gets up to start waking away with Sihan. Clan angrily exclaims about the failure of the mission and that they should retreat since Higher Xion is down. He asks the remaining soldiers to take care of the dead ones when one of them hesitantly responds that all the soldiers are alive, they just have been buried in the ground with that force. This comes as a major shock to Clan on how they are all fine, with not a single broken bone, and alive even after being hit this badly. The guy didn't even cause a single death. The last and most obvious sentence is, "What the hell just happened?" Sihan and Alita walk far enough in the forest where Sihan consoles an injured, tiredly walking Alita that they won't be followed from there now. He thinks to himself how it's a relief that they didn't follow him, since it would have been annoying for him. He also wonders if the side effects of crossing dimensions were stronger than he anticipated, since his powers seem to be only a tenth of the original and his mana powers don't even seem to be there compared to when he took down the king back then. He thinks of how long it'll be till these side effects wear off. He is brought out of his thoughts by a wincing Alita, whom he inquires of being okay, since her arm had been broken. She gratefully responds how it could have been worse so she's lucky and it's all good. Sihan looks at her funnily, thinking how is that something to be thankful for, while she puts her arm in a sling around her neck for support. She further thanks Sihan formally, in a mood to be pleasant and in sync with the scenario that just unfolded in front of her, and says she'll be on her own now. Sihan just stands there too stunned to react for a moment and then starts exclaiming how and where she would be on her own with a broken arm, and a risk of life. She calmly responds that she can be extra cautious, to which Hyper Sihan exclaims how it's far more dangerous, and then sighs to calmly explain to her that it's his fault she got into this mess and got injured so he'll help her. Alita processes this and after a solid moment of consideration agrees to it. Sihan wonders why she even took that long to consider this and tells her to drop formalities with him, and asks where she planned on going since she can't stay here. They consider places but aware of the fact that there will be search parties, decide to go to Kagan City for the while. The Lilstein Kingdom Palace shows its first king, Lilstein I, calmly reading his books in a palace that looked more like a library due to the amount of bookshelves aligned there when a scared servant hesitantly brings him the news from the search party that went to Defilon Mountain, where Alita's cabin was. The king, one of his former partners Sihan, closes his book and inquires about what the news is. Lilstein rushes down towards the dungeon of his palace and the gates open to reveal a space full of books with a huge capsule in the center, filled with some red chemical that looks very much like blood. Lilstein's name is called. He gets him to move towards a cell where a chained guy with multiple wounds curses at him. The guy has a green circle beneath him. Lilstein demeaningly talks to the guy about being well enough in terms he wants and calls him the descendant of Lusklin. He further reveals that the red circle beneath him turned green because his mana powers have matured enough now. This angers the guy who curses more at Lilstein and pities the people who worship him. Lilstein nonchalantly mocks the guy about him being the real pitiful person, for his heart is about to get snatched right out of his chest now. This jolts the guy, but before he could completely process this, Lil Stein quite literally grabs his heart out of his chest in a monstrous way, as if he was not dealing with a human at all. He looks at the mana he snatched out of the guy's heart but realizes that this is not sufficient enough to break the walls of the dimensions, because the guy was some low-grade, far-off relative of the bloodline of Lusklin, and he'd need a much pure blood to gather enough mana to break the walls of dimensions of other worlds. This reveals the true intention of Lil Stein for capturing the descendants of Luskan alive rather than directly executing them. Lil Stein suddenly recalls the conversation he had with his servant who filled him in about the failure of his men's mission at Defilon Mountain. He was told that all their men were brutally beaten up by a single man who did not even have any arms on him, so they could not capture their target. Lil Stein further explained the appearance of the person being black hair and black eyes, similar to the Galan race of Kagan village. Lil Stein thinks about the appearance along with the fact that traces of summoning magic were found there. This made him fear the possibility that Sihan was back in Terranor. Even though, a worried Lil Stein then shrugged this thought off considering there was no way Sihan crossed dimensions again without his notice. His paranoid expressions were not unnoticeable, while he kept repeating there's no way this happened. Sihan is amazed by the looks of Kagan City and nostalgically explains to Alita how he knows this place as South Clanium City back from the king's rule and he used to have his main base here. Alita is surprised by the information of the main base, to which Sihan further explains how it's easier to hide in this place, since there's this race called Galan race that looks very similar to his South Asians. Alita is again baffled by the term South Asians when he further explains that it's his people back on Earth. Alita is completely taken aback by this knowledge of people looking like him as it connects to the rumored thousand change energy of the thief Queen Lavina. Thousand change energy has been a technique where one uses its fighting energy to control the air around their face to make it look different in others' sights. Alita further refers to it as a technique of thief Queen Lavina along with her stealth technique. Sihan gets pretty offended at that and tells how it was him who developed this technique and taught it to Lavina. He then offers Alita if she wants to learn the technique from him since it'd make it easier for her to hide. But she declines receiving such big help from Sihan, with which Sihan sighs that they still aren't getting any closer, and tells her to drop that topic then and look for an accommodation. Alita thinks to herself how she finds Sihan's face quite funny looking to accept the offer of learning to do that. Sihan finds a stay-in hotel and looks at it with quite a familiarity, not because he knew the hotel but because there used to be the gallows 10 years ago. Alita gets pretty frightened at the possibility of hotel being haunted, to which Sihan seems amused that he could meet many familiar faces as ghosts. Sihan proceeds to get a key for their room but hears the old receptionist man irritatedly blabbering, which makes Sihan realize he has been speaking informally to strangers and elders ever since he came back to Terranor. Alita further embarrasses him with the fact that even if he's a legendary hero and she doesn't care, that man was pretty old so he got offended by that. He starts getting self-conscious about how it's so bad that he has been doing it without realizing since he didn't have to talk formally to many people in Aston language from back then. He then chuckles nervously that he has been rude to a stranger girl unknowingly, but she indifferently responds that he can keep speaking casually now. Getting to a more serious conversation, Alita questions why he came to this place, to which Sihan says the first thing he wants to do is adjust to the place by traveling around with her for a while if she allows. Alita finds this question a bit too blunt but composes herself and explains how she doesn't think it's a good idea for him, since they could get caught because of her. She also questions a now stunned Sihan on the fact that she'll be questioning herself for the reason the whole time, if he just travels with her the whole time with no proper explanation. A tortured Sihan reluctantly reveals to Alita that she'd easily get caught without him, since every time someone summons an otherworldly creature, the dimensions here shake, but since he did so himself using her, it only vibrates the dimensions a bit, so they'd be leaving traces wherever they go. Alita questions this in extreme distress and panic, but Sihan calms her down that he has covered the traces via his magic. But since the spell needs to be recasted every 2 days, so that's why he has been asking her to accompany him. Alita, now starting to relax and process this, distractedly accepts that she definitely needs him, but also puts out a much important question: but why does Sihan need her?